G'day guys, Matt here from Not in the Manual. Today on the commute I wanted to talk to you about batteries, LFP batteries in particular. This car, the Model 3 Standard Range Plus, in 2021 started coming with the LFP battery, and that's what I've got in my car. I've been living with this car for 6 months now, and what I've learnt is the LFP battery it's pretty good for here where I live in Sydney. I can't comment on cold climates. Sydney's coldest it gets here in winter is 3 or 4 degrees I might get. I'm on the north side of the city close to the beaches, so I don't get as cold as some parts of Sydney, but I think the coldest we get is 3 or 4 degrees, and that would be an odd super cold day. So that's right in the middle of winter. At the moment we're in summer. You can see on my commute to work it's already 22 degrees. Today is going to be over 30 degrees. Any lithium battery likes to be warm to work, nice and warm. Everything's sort of nice and warm and at the operating temperature, so the electrons can flow pretty freely, and it sort of helps the chemistry do its thing. LFPs are a bit more susceptible to operating in cold conditions, but I think as long as you're preheating the car, Tesla have they've sort of revamped the software to be a bit better at managing the temperature of the battery. So I don't think that's going to be a concern for a lot of people. And that's the great thing about Tesla is if there's a problem, they can usually get it sorted. Over a couple of updates, they'll have the issues sorted and they'll be straight onto it. They can pull a lot of data from a lot of cars in a short period of time, so that helps them troubleshoot these problems a bit easier. And yeah, I know when I first got this car, it was the middle of winter, and the only issue I had was it was limiting the regen braking. It was sort of 12, 13 degree days outside. I'd preheat the battery, and even when it had the battery at 22 degrees preheat, which is still a little low. I think it should be preconditioning the battery to, preconditioning the battery to, maybe more like 25 degrees, but I'm not too sure where that's at the moment. When we run through I've got to do a video on fitting the CAN bus tool, the tool that reads the CAN bus called Scan My Tesla, and you can watch what the car's doing when it's preheating and preconditioning, and I can show you that it's pretty interesting how it all works. And depending on the ambient temperature and the temperature in the cabin and state of charge, there's a lot of different factors to how the car decides it's going to preheat. Sometimes it uses the heat pump, sometimes it uses the rear motor as a heat source, and I can go more into that. It basically just runs the rear motor out of phase, so it's running high currents through the stator of the motor to generate heat, but it won't actually generate drive. So the way that the windings in the stator are pulsed, it won't generate drive. So it's structuring the magnetic fields not to rotate the motor. So, but it still generates heat in the motor. Then the cooling fluid that runs through the motor is then circulated through the battery once it's heated up by the motor. So it's using the rear motor. So that's what Tesla's about, is simplifying systems in cars, and the simpler they are, the more reliable they are. So you can still have a simple system that gives you all the features you require, and that's where Tesla has excelled at. So simpler systems also mean fewer components and also a cheaper car as well. So, and some of these things can make a significant difference. I mean, using that rear motor as a battery heater to heat the battery, saves on an extra PTC heater, a ceramic type heater in the car purely for the battery. And while you're driving, that motor's generating heat anyway, and being shared within all the systems, either to heat the cabin or, as I spoke about in the previous efficiency video. So the LFP battery specifically, you heard people say LFP, but you know, I quickly learned what that meant, and it's really not what you think. People say, yeah, it's a lithium iron phosphate battery, and you think they're saying ion, lithium ion battery. Well, it's not, they're saying iron. So IRON, so that red mineral, rusty mineral they grab out of the ground, iron. So that's the chemistry of this battery is a lithium iron phosphate. So that's the cathode side of the battery. The anode side of the battery, so you're looking at like the battery terminals, positive and negative. So the anode side is made of graphite. So they're the two main chemistries in this battery that react to store energy and release energy. So the lithium iron phosphate doesn't use nickel or cobalt, and from what I've read, there's an ethical benefit for that, because nickel and cobalt are rare earth minerals. They're mined in very poor countries a lot of the time, especially cobalt. And there's controversy around cobalt having child labour used to mine it, and or being used in that process of mining somewhere along the line. A bit of controversy over those minerals, and they are rare minerals. Iron's pretty abundant and a bit cheaper. So the lithium ion batteries are something that, yeah, it's a great chemistry, but there are some downsides. It's less energy dense, which means you need a bigger battery for the same amount of kilowatt hours. That's okay on a car like this where it's a standard range. So they can fit, or they do now in the current model in 2022, they fit a 60 kilowatt hour battery. So they've gone from the, I think this one's 52.5 or something like that, or 55 with the 2.5 kilowatt hour buffer. And the other one, I don't know a lot about the 60 kilowatt hour one. Its capacity would be more than 60 kilowatt hours with the buffer. I don't know it off the top of my head, but basically, yeah, they give you these buffers on the ratings. So Tesla aren't great at publishing a lot of these ratings, but especially with the power of the motors and things like that. But this is what I've found in my research. So for this battery, they do manage, they can fit 60 kilowatt hour capacity battery. So that's not big enough for the long range or the performance versions of this car. So it's just on the standard range versions. And I believe in the Model Y as well uses the LFP battery for the standard range. So if you have a car that needs longer range, you know, LFP chemistry in its current form, you know, doesn't have enough capacity in a Model 3 anyway. So in a larger car where you've got a bit more space for a battery, you could probably fit a bigger capacity LFP battery. But in this car, it's only in the standard range models. And that helped bring the price down of the standard range as well. So the price of the LFP batteries is lower. Its capacity is lower, but say, like, look, for this car, it doesn't matter. So we're still achieving the range that was designed with this car. And with the 60 kilowatt hour battery, they even worked out they can fit the bigger battery in, and they're getting even more range. I think it's 490 kilometer WLTP range on that car. And the rated ranges on these cars, it is like the petrol and diesel cars. The range it can be difficult to achieve. I think the range is in ideal conditions. It's a bit of a mixture of driving conditions. I don't think it's with too bigger hill climbs involved. But if you look at the average kilowatt hour consumption per 100 or per kilometre, you know, you can exceed 400 kilometres in this car. So I'd say you'd probably get close to 450 real life around the city in the 60 kilowatt hour version. So LFP, it does have some of those downsides with the cold weather, but as long as you're preconditioning your car, I think even in cold climates, you should be okay. I think, sometimes as you're driving, if it's super cold, -20, -30, say, you may have some issues with charging over long distances, but as long as you're navigating to a supercharger, the car is going to take care of managing the thermal management of the battery. It's going to take care of that for you, and quickly keep that battery at the operating temperature. The heating and the cooling system does scavenge heat from the battery, so that may be an issue in some circumstances if you're trying to heat your cabin and the car's drawing too much heat from the battery. But really, I think in the background, that's something that just improves over time as we get software updates. Tesla get better at managing the thermal regulation of the battery and motors and everything, and sharing that heating and cooling system within the different systems of the car. So there are some downsides to the LFP, but I think most of those downsides are going to be managed by Tesla in the background, as I said. Now we can talk about some of the positives. So for me, once I looked at the LFP battery and did a lot of research, I realized that I didn't think the battery was going to be a big factor in my research. The battery chemistry was going to be a factor in my research until I started reading up about the LFP battery, and I don't think it's something to be scared of. It's not a new technology. It's new for cars. This car was the first one Tesla used the LFP battery in. But having this car for 6 months now, I haven't had any issues. So the LFP chemistry, one of the positives is it's a safer chemistry than a nickel cobalt type battery. The runaway, so the one thing you've got to think about with batteries, and the risk, we're talking very, very low risks here, but the thermal runaway risk of a lithium ion battery is much higher with a nickel cobalt chemistry. So they're much more energy dense, they charge to a higher voltage, and they're under a bit of stress when they're charged to 100%. And the LFP battery isn't under as much stress. Its thermal runaway temperature is much higher than that of a nickel cobalt battery, and that is something it's something that's always in the back of your mind. The battery in an electric vehicle catching fire. It's super low risk, but you do hear some stories, and LFP battery is much safer, so I can put your mind at ease with that. And that's one of the reasons, well, there's two reasons why it's used, is because they're cheaper and they are much safer. So you'll find a lot of those home battery systems use LFP batteries as well. You'll see people doing their sort of home solar systems, or the camper van solar systems will use little 100 amp hour 12 volt lithium iron phosphate LFP batteries for that system. It's a very safe chemistry. So I think that's one of the things that is the thing. It's cheaper and it's safer. That's probably the main thing with it. But another benefit that people may not realize is it's got a higher cycle life. So this LFP battery in this car, it's new to the Teslas, so we really don't know what the life's going to be like, but the LFP chemistry does have a higher cycle life, and it has less degradation over time, and the battery is less stressed when it's charged to 100%. So with the nickel cobalt batteries, you need to be careful about charging the battery to 100% all the time. You can really do some damage to the battery, and they recommend you only charge it to 100% when you need that full capacity on a long trip. And you'll actually see in the Tesla the sliding charging level you can set. It will say daily and trip levels. So daily is charging to 90%, and then for a trip you charge to 100%. With the LFP battery, that little notch is gone. It's just charged to 100% whenever you can, and that basically has very little effect on the life of the battery. It still does, degrade the battery charging to 100%. Any lithium battery has a limitation in its cycles, but the calculations with the LFP battery in this car are that the battery will last the life of the car. And that's where they're starting to look at structural batteries in cars, because batteries are lasting a lot longer than they originally thought. Now, we've covered a lot more kilometers with the electric vehicles around the world. There's a lot more data coming back, and I think there's been some surprising results in the longevity of batteries. So I think that's where we're going to see a big change in battery technology coming up in the next few years. So the lithium iron phosphate battery, that's great. They can take that abuse. You can charge them to 100% every day if you want, and most of the time I do that. I'm down to like 46% at the moment, and that's one thing you soon learn owning an electric vehicle, is that you never, if you can charge it at home or at work, you're really just plugging it in whenever it's parked up, and you're just topping off the battery back up to wherever you've got your charge limit set, and you're never really running it to dead flat. So I'm mostly charging off a 10 amp 240 volt 10 amp socket, charging it nice and slow, which is great for the battery. It's much better for your battery to charge it slow. You then find that the voltages between all the different cells of the battery balance out, and what that means, if you've got a cell that is lower voltage than the others, it's going to be under a bit more strain. So if you keep the voltage between all the cells in the battery balanced and around a very close voltage, they all share the load pretty evenly, and it's much better for the health of your battery. And that's, usually once a cell starts dying, I used to see it in the old lead acid batteries, it's under a lot of strain then. It's the weak link in the chain, and it usually fails pretty quickly once it starts taking those heavier loads. It's under more stress. So if you can charge, keep your supercharging for when you really need to, or your fast charging for when you really need to, and just charge off a slow point whenever you can. That's going to be better for the health of your battery. So I just top the battery up to 100% nearly every day when I can. No problems there. That's also good for this battery as well. That leads me on to the next point. With the LFP battery, there were some concerns when these cars were first released into Europe. Not concerns, there were some issues around the state of charge of the battery. So I wanted to talk about that this morning a bit, just to maybe explain how that happens. So with a battery, you have a capacity of the battery of so many kilowatt hours. And what you're doing with the battery is you're drawing the electrons out of the battery. You're lowering its state of charge. So you've got to think, how does the car know what the state of charge is? There's a couple of different ways it can do that. So you can look at the voltage in the battery and say, okay, well, this battery roughly 360, almost 370 volts fully charged. The nickel cobalt batteries, like in the long range and the performance, they get up over 400 volts fully charged. So that range of voltage from fully discharged to fully discharged with the LFP is a lot less than the NCA or the nickel cobalt batteries. So really that becomes very difficult to use voltage to determine the state of charge of the battery. So if you try and just look at voltage alone with an LFP battery, your state of charge figures can be all over the place and can be quite difficult to manage. So you've got to come up with other ways of determining what the state of charge the battery's at. So you can either refine your voltage system through analyzing data from a lot of different batteries, which Tesla can do. So you can refine that system and rejig the software to make it a little bit more accurate and a little bit prone to misreading the battery percentage. Or you can pair it with another method to make it more accurate. So when the battery is fully charged, one of the other things you can accurately measure is the current that the battery is discharged from the battery. If you know how much current is discharged from the battery over a period of time, then you can tell how many kilowatt hours the battery has given. And on the same token, you can tell how much goes back in when you regen brake and things like that. And how that is done, how current is measured, there's a few different ways, but the easiest way and built into the car is a thing called a shunt. It sounds like a pretty weird name, but I used to work with these on forklifts. We used to have the shunts as well. So for part of the system, it's used to measure the current output to you probably have you've got a few shunts within the car. So you've got one within the motor circuit that is looking at how much current is supplied to the motor, and then you have one in line when the cabling from the battery goes into the system. You'll have a shunt as one of the first components in the system, and that's measuring current coming directly out of the battery as close to the battery as possible. So what a shunt is it's a piece of metal, as simply as that. You know, there's different makeups of what the shunts are made of, but it's a strip of steel. It can be a length of cable that you're measuring the voltage at both ends. So as current flows through a component, you have a restriction to the current flowing. That's called the resistance, and that creates a voltage drop across every component in the electrical circuit. And this may just be a very, very, very minimal voltage drop, but it's still a voltage drop. So if you know the resistance of a component or a length of wire or a strip of steel, then you can calculate the current flow pretty easily if you measure the voltage drop. So that's what they'd be doing in this car as well. So they would have a length of wire or a length of steel or a length of copper that they are measuring the voltage drop across, and you can then calculate the amps. So as I said before, you know the amps that the battery is given pretty accurately. You can determine how much energy that battery has supplied by looking at the amps over a period of time. So if you charge the battery to 100%, this car knows, okay, I've got, for example, 50 kilowatt hours to give. So you're driving along, the current's being discharged, the car knows accurately how many kilowatt hours the battery is given. It can then say, okay, you've used 1% or whatever. So pairing that alongside the voltage method, you can have a pretty accurate method of determining the battery's state of charge. And I'd say that's what Tesla are doing. I don't know for sure, but that's one of the methods that I worked with in electric forklifts. And you really need to be charging to 100% every now and again just to reset that system. These things can there is a little bit of a margin of error, and that just multiplies over time. So just remember, with the LFP battery, charge it to 100%. They say at least once a week, and that will reset the battery, the BMS, the battery management system, and it will know I'm at 100% again. I've got this much capacity, and it just resets that system and makes it a bit more accurate. So I think I've covered everything. Hey guys, I need to interrupt there for a second. I forgot to give you an important piece of information. I'm new to this whole video editing thing. I'm trying to do everything unscripted and raw off the top of my head on a commute to work. So occasionally I'm going to forget something when I didn't want to reshoot the whole video. So with the low internal resistance of the LFP battery, it's one of the advantages I forgot to mention the positive side to that. The big positive side to that is a consistent energy output from 100% down to, you know, close to fully discharged. You can, you know, with very little limitation down at the lower percentages. So you still have that, you have that consistent feel when you're driving it. So you have, even at 100% charged, you've still got pretty good regenerative braking, as long as the battery's warm enough, even at 100% charge. So in some cars, when they're 100% charged, you have no regen braking at all. With the LFP battery, you do get some regen braking, but down, you know, at a higher state of charge, down some longer hills with regen braking, it will cut it back a bit, but you still do have some regen braking there, and it's still usable. It's not totally lost. So that's one of the benefits, and I think so with the regen braking and the acceleration, even right down at like 5 or 10% charge, you still have some pretty good acceleration with this car. And, you know, being the cheapest Tesla, being the shortest range of the Teslas, you know, it still performs pretty well. I mean, this car has more power than most people will ever need. It's nice and smooth to drive. So that's another benefit of the LFP. I just wanted to squeeze that in there because I did forget to mention that in the first take. So I'll let you rejoin my original video. The LFP battery is not something to be scared of. I think it's something to think of, that when this car's, you know, when I want to sell this car, who knows, 6 or 7 years time, if it's got a battery in it that has very little degradation, I think that's only going to be an asset. It will I think it will increase the value of this car, and I think LFP batteries are a positive thing. I really would like to see that technology progress, and I think there are companies like BYD in China and others that are producing LFP batteries that they're coming up with different ways of manufacturing the batteries to and the chemistry makeup and the shape of the cells and things like that help increase the energy density of the LFP battery. So I don't think it's something to be scared of. I've only had a good experience with it here with my car in Australia, but as I said, I've got ideal conditions here. You can see today, even on my commute, the temperature's gone up 3 or 4 degrees. We're in for a bit of a warm one today. So I don't need to worry about cold climate. If you guys have got any comments, someone you know, living in a cold climate, even here in Australia, you know, there are some areas that get cold, not super cold, but some areas that in winter, you know, people are going to have snow and ice. We're not talking -20, -30 here in Australia, but in some of the alpine regions, you know, you may have some concerns, and I think that what main thing is just precondition your car before you drive. That's something I do anyway. I just set the departure time in the car. Tesla have a system within the screen to set a departure time. It will precondition the car. It will precondition the cabin. It'll raise the temperature of the battery to a good, nice, warm operating temperature, and you just won't need to worry about it. I think it's something that people can tend to worry about a bit too much, and I'm not saying there weren't problems with the LFP battery when it first came out, but I think a lot of those things are easily fixed with software. It's I don't think it gets to the stage where you know it's not fixable. Tesla are giving updates sometimes every 2 weeks and giving new features, and sometimes they're just fun features, but other times there's more serious things going on in the background that you don't see, you don't read about in the release notes, and I think you know, that's what Tesla are doing. They're learning, getting data back from the cars, you know, learning how to make things more efficient, improve things, and make them a bit more convenient for you. So hopefully there, I think I've covered everything. If you've got any questions, just put some questions in the comments. This is all that I've learned doing my research on this car and combining that with my experience working in electric forklifts for years. And you know, that was mostly lead acid batteries, but a lot of the basic principles are the same. you know, voltage, current, resistance, you know, your three main components in an electrical system. No matter how complex the system is, it always comes back to those. You know, you can't, you know, you got to come back to those three basic principles. And when you're looking at a system, you know, you use those to determine what's going on and troubleshoot. So anyway, I'm almost at work now, so hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you like this video, these commuting videos. It's easy for me because I'd only just be driving anyway. I've got sort of half-hour commute, so it's a good time, you know, good length of time for a video. Let me know if you think it's boring. I could maybe drive somewhere a bit more interesting, go in a different way to work. But yeah, let me know what you think. I'm new to all this video and videoing and vlogging sort of stuff. So yeah, let me know what you think. Give me some suggestions. If you got any questions about anything technical on the LFP battery, if you want to know my experience, I'm going to make some more videos on looking at voltage and current and everything through the Scan My Tesla app. So look out for that video coming out on how to fit that system to your car, where to buy the componentry, how to download the app and set it all up. So I'll be doing a video on that and giving you a sort of a quick intro into CAN bus systems in cars as well. And yeah, hopefully you learned something. Got to always be learning. I'm always still learning. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next video. Thanks.